welcome at this time Ray Hummel III, who's done a number of recordings, well known in the Grand Rapids area as a celebrated performer. And also with us this morning, Marty Plender, his business agent, as we take an interesting look at showbiz in West Michigan. We welcome you both to the program. Ray was scheduled for an interview about a month and a half ago. Couldn't make it. We had a scheduling conflict. Now he's back with us, and we're delighted to have you. Ray, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Gil. It's good to be here.
How long have you been in the business?
I've been entertaining now professionally for a good 13 years in the clubs. And I started playing guitar when I was 9 years old.
So you're what, about in early 20s now?
Thank you. No, just a little bit older than that. I'm in my 30s now.
You've breached that magic threshold number.
Yes, I sure have. I've been over it a few years.
Ray, you were one of the local boys that started, as you say, very, very young, playing, had music in your soul, as it were, and there were a lot during the 1960s. As you continued, you decided to stay with it. You know, there's a lot of discouraging moments, as you can attest to, I'm sure, and as I can, as years being involved in the years of music that I have. But you stuck with it. And right now you are known as a Nashville recording artist, and anybody that gets to record in Nashville and gets some of those records out has sort of made it. The next thing is, of course, the cash register. But why don't you bring our listeners up to date by starting back when the 60s were roaring and there were all kinds of local groups and they were competing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, let me see now. I started with a group called the Ju Jus back in 1962. And we were together for a few years, and we cut our first record that you played, Jack. I don't know if I can say call letters of the station or not.
Certainly, WLAV.
WLAV, okay. And we were very fortunate. The record got up to number 2. And the flip side of the record was called Hey Little Girl. Of course, the A-side, You Treated Me Bad.
That's right. And that was, wow, it brings back memories, the Ju Jus.
1965.
And for our listeners who may not know, I was rocking and rolling in those years on WLAV, and we did have we had a local list. For those of you who remember our top 40 list that was published every week and put out in the various record stores, and that pretty much told everyone in our area anyway what records were selling, and the Ju Jus did get up to number 2 then. So continue on.
Okay. I just sort of course, during the time then after I cut You Treated Me Bad, I went to Grand Rapids Junior College for a few years and studied business, and also kind of minored in music, and finally decided it was kind of a conflict to go into the family business or go into the music, but I decided that the music was where I should be. It seemed like it was the area that I was most happiest in. So I went into music and eventually got an agent out of Milwaukee, Artist Corporation of America, and traveled the road for 6 years. And then I came back home and decided to do some club work here in Grand Rapids again, and started corresponding with the publishing houses in Nashville, Tennessee, and started getting involved into records, recording, got a producer, and started things rolling.
Well, at what stage did the writing come to be? In other words, you were playing the guitar and you were interested basically in music. Does every musician want to write, or does every musician write just automatically?
Well, I think it's kind of a part of you. I think it's something that you want to do. I think it's very important to write your own songs, because I think you can, you have a lot more feeling for your own things than you would, let's say, somebody else's material. I think it's important.
So you started early on then in, say, for example, composing your own tunes?
I would say I wrote my first song when I was about 12 years old.
Yeah, see, everybody probably thinks, well, you're either a musician or you're a lyricist or composer, but you're not all three. But it happens that way. So somewhere along the line, you then got people in Nashville, which has steadily grown through these years that we're talking about in terms of the place. It's sort of the capital of the recording industry now.
Yes, it sure is. It was in about 1977 that I started making my contacts in Nashville. And it was through, correspondence of several hundred letters that finally the contacts were made. And in 1977, that's when I made the contact with my with a gentleman that was to become my producer, Chuck Chelman from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
What was the first thing you did then when somebody said, okay, come on down to Nashville and let's see what you can do among the heavies? Because there's a lot of heavies down there recording at the same time you were.
Well, if I say that I wasn't nervous, I certainly was nervous. But I definitely learned an awful lot by going down there. I seen how a professional producer works and how the professional studio musicians, do their thing. They just wonderful. They played the song through one time and they had it on tape. It was just amazing.
Did they do justice to it? You have a feel for your song, a certain mood has created the melody, the tune, the lyrics, and then suddenly you're under the bright lights of a recording studio. Did it hold up as you had originally composed it under the scrutiny of their musical approach?
Well, first off, the last songs that I recorded, I did not write. And they actually enhanced them more than even the original writers did. I mean, when those pickers got in there, we call them pickers down in Nashville, they just did such a wonderful job. The music almost brought tears to your eyes. They were so great.
Down home kind of a flavor.
Oh, yeah. Very friendly, too. Like I worked with Mel Tillis's backup singers, and they did all the backup singing on the records, and they were just really nice people. They had no ego thing or anything. They're just real down to earth.
So what happened then? You have some of your very own songs, and some that you recorded, of course, are not your own. But you sang, and you had a decent voice, so people recognize that, plus the fact you played. So with all the recording that you've done, you still are performing on your own now as opposed to being in a group. Is that true?
That's true, In fact, I'm wondering if I can mention, is it okay if I mention
Oh,
Jack,
surely.
I'm working right now. I'm working at the Pick Motor Inn, and I'm working there Tuesday through Thursday from 8 until 12, and also on Friday and Saturday nights from 9 to 1.
At the Pick Motor Inn?
At the Pick Motor Inn on Plainfield Avenue.
Know it well. And that's where you are going to be for how long now?
Well, I just talked to my agent today, and he said that I've been extended, so I don't know exactly how long, probably as it stands right now, indefinitely.
So you have been out on the road, as Gil alluded to early on. We did have you booked to come in and chit-chat about your latest record, which we'll get to. But you were on the road and just couldn't make it. So you do entertain in Grand Rapids when you can, just to sort of keep touch with your hometown, right?
Oh, yes. I'd kind of go, I'd go out of town for a while and come back home for a while and just back and forth,
But you, again, getting back to our statement a little while ago, Ray, you are you're a sole entertainer. You don't have backup groups and all of that business.
Oh, no. I do use some soundtrack tapes in the background of things that I've recorded, that type of thing.
So it's your voice, your guitar, and your personality on stage while entertaining.
In fact, if it's okay, Jack, I'd like to maybe explain to you some of the instruments that I play and kind of go into detail.
Yes.
Like if your listeners decide to come down and hear me, I'd like to kind of fill them in, on what they're going to see.
Surely.
And hear. First off, I play an instrument called a guitar organ, which is kind of wild. It's wired up inside like a Hammond B3 organ. It's got several thousand transistors inside of it. It also produces the sound of accordion. And of course, you also play it like a guitar, so you get the guitar sound too. Then in conjunction with that, I run what we call a sideman, which is like electronic drum unit, which is also hooked up to the bass pedals. So with this particular unit, I get the sound of the drums, all the drum, percussion sound effects. I get the violin sounds, piano fill, so it's really, quite a full sound. And then on top of that, then I also play the harmonica, and also the banjo, tenor banjo, and I sing, of course.
A one-man band. Are these all your own creations, Ray?
Well, I've kind of put all the different, units that have been available on the market together and using, I've more or less come up with the ideas myself for my act.
It sounds as if it takes $1 or $2 to get started in that business.
Maybe $2, Gil. Yes,
That
it does.
much.
It takes an awful lot of money, really.
Would you guesstimate, if it's convenient, what it would take to reproduce your equipment today? You picked it up along the years, but what would it cost roughly?
Well, I don't know. It'd be in the thousands of dollars.
That's the problem back in the 60s when I used to work so closely with local bands. as well as regional and national. There was a place called The Place. Do you remember that, Ray?
Yes, I do.
And Marty, too, right?
Yes, I do.
It was, for our listeners who may never have heard of The Place, it was quite a rock and roll, popular rock and roll spot, if you will, on Plymouth, Northeast. And it was an old Quonset hut. The Place. It was quite a place. There was no doubt about that. And we had a lot of local bands come in and perform. But I do know that one of the problems, of course, is the money that it took to get started. Every band that was worth its weight in gold wanted to have a record, and that wasn't easy. So it was a struggle through the 60s, and there was a lot of that kind of thing going on as I watched the rock and roll change from year to year, from its really big time in the mid-60s. Bands became more and more important. So, you know, you just, as a disc jockey's going up, we used to do disc jockey dances, if you will, Gil. And that was all that was necessary. But then the kids became more sophisticated and they wanted to have live music, and they sure had it. There was a lot of talent in this city. As a matter of fact, I'm looking in a brochure that Ray has here about he and what he's all about, and getting up to his latest record that was talked about here at midday not too long ago. I didn't realize the people that performed recording that record. I'm talking about Rick Troll, for example.
Yes.
And Danny Hines, two of whom I know. Paula Johnson
Oh, really?
was involved. Oh, yeah. Rick and Danny I know. And then I do not know Dave DeVos or Gary Robbie. Is that it, Roby?
Mm-hmm. Ropey.
And they all, so I didn't realize, I thought you recorded it in Nashville.
Well, this one particular record, only Adam's Rib to Women's Lib, was actually recorded in Grand Rapids. The other ones were cut in Nashville.
And so you used local talent, good local talent, as far as I'm concerned. You talk about Rick Troll on the drums. Anyway, I do remember a lot of the good old days, if you will, and it was a struggle, but that's why I admire Ray. In all of these years now, he has progressed to where he is, and you stuck with it. And sometimes it gets pretty discouraging.
Yes, it isn't all glitter and glamour and tinsel. You know,
Which people tend to believe when you're talking about an entertainer. They go to be entertained. They go to a nightclub and a room of any kind.
but
And
it is a lot of fun. I
oh,
wouldn't do
sure.
anything else.
in turn, once it gets in your blood, it's very, very
That's
hard to
right.
get out.
Yeah. Just like the radio business is probably in your blood.
Yes. So, Ray, tell us about some of the places you've been and rooms you played.
Well, let me see now. Now, the years that I traveled for the agency, or when I was being booked out of Milwaukee through ACA, Artists Corporation of America, I traveled about 15 states of the United States. And I traveled through such states as Illinois and Indiana, Michigan, the Dakotas, Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa. I worked big towns, big cities like Chicago, and I worked small towns like Boone, Iowa, and
Boone, Iowa.
Boone, Iowa.